26 hours ago, I sent an invitation to the woman who thanked my husband for the night they supposedly shared, and neither of them realized I had already decided how the evening would end. I didn't cry. I didn't throw his phone across the room. I didn't wake him up. Instead, I memorized 12 words glowing on a screen in the darkness. Last night meant everything to me. Thank you. No heart emoji. No signature. No explanation. Just 12 words that landed with the precision of a surveyor's marker driven into fresh concrete. A single point that would eventually reveal the entire structure hidden beneath the surface. My husband, Daniel, was asleep beside me. His breathing was slow and even. The phone rested on the nightstand, still illuminated for another few seconds before the display faded to black. I looked at the ceiling for almost an hour after that, not because I didn't know what to think, because I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I invited a stranger to dinner. She accepted within 7 minutes. Neither she nor Daniel understood that the invitation wasn't about revenge. It was about measurement, and every measurement begins with a fixed point. Welcome back to Reality Drama Story, where family secrets unfold and quiet decisions change everything. If you are new here, drop a comment and subscribe. Now let's get into it. When I was 9 years old, my grandfather taught me something that had nothing to do with buildings and everything to do with people. He had been a carpenter for 42 years. Every Saturday morning, he would let me hand him nails while he worked inside a small wooden workshop behind his house. The place smelled like cedar, old coffee, and machine oil. Every shelf had a purpose. Every tool returned to the same place at the end of the day. One afternoon, I asked him why he kept measuring the same board again and again. He smiled without looking up. "Wood lies," he said. "Eyes lie even more. That's why we measure." I laughed because I thought he was talking about lumber. Years later, I realized he had never been talking about lumber. He was talking about people. He believed that anger rushed construction. Patience completed it. That lesson stayed with me long after he passed away. It shaped how I handled friendships, especially marriage. I met Daniel when I was 28. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charming in the way movies describe charming men. He simply listened. During our first conversation at a charity fundraiser, he asked more questions than he answered. By the end of the night, he remembered my favorite author, my coffee order, and the fact that I hated elevators. Small details, reliable details, the kind that make trust feel ordinary. We married 18 months later. For the first 5 years, our life looked exactly the way neighbors imagine a happy marriage should look. Sunday breakfasts, vacation photos, late-night grocery runs because we always forgot milk. Our house slowly became a collection of quiet routines. The blue ceramic bowl by the front door where Daniel dropped his keys every evening. The old maple tree in the backyard where we planned to build a swing someday. The handwritten grocery lists taped to the refrigerator with a faded magnet from Maine. Nothing dramatic, nothing remarkable, which is probably why I ignored the small changes when they began. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, like water finding tiny cracks inside a foundation. Daniel started traveling more often. Client dinners became overnight conferences. Weekend meetings appeared on calendars that had once been almost empty. Every explanation sounded reasonable. Every delay had a logical cause. Individually, none of them mattered. Together, they formed a pattern. Patterns deserve attention. 3 years before the message appeared on his phone, we started a small consulting company together. Officially, Daniel was the public face. He loved presentations. He enjoyed networking. Clients remembered his smile. I preferred contracts, budgets, risk assessments. I built the systems that kept everything standing. People often assumed Daniel owned the company. He never corrected them. At first, I didn't mind. Recognition isn't the same thing as ownership. But over time, something subtle happened. When journalists interviewed him, my name disappeared. When awards arrived, they were addressed only to him. At networking events, I became Daniel's wife, not Daniel's business partner, not co-founder, just his wife. The change was so gradual that nobody noticed, including me, until one conversation changed everything. About 16 months before that text message arrived, our attorney, Margaret Collins, asked me to stay after a quarterly legal review. Daniel had already left for another meeting. Margaret closed the conference room door. Then she slid a folder across the table. "There are a few documents," she said carefully, "that only require one signature." I opened the folder. Inside were revised ownership agreements, operating amendments, contingency clauses. Nothing unusual, except one page, a succession clause. Margaret explained that because most of our intellectual property had been registered using documentation I personally created before the company officially launched, the ownership structure wasn't as simple as Daniel believed. According to the filing dated March 14th, 6 years earlier, every major client contract depended on licensing rights attached to intellectual property held under my original registration, not the company's. Mine. Margaret looked directly at me. "I don't think Daniel fully understands how these documents work. Should he?" "Eventually." I closed the folder. "Not today." The papers went into my home office safe. Life continued. Months passed. Nothing happened. Until 12 words appeared on a glowing screen beside a sleeping husband. After breakfast the morning following the message, Daniel kissed my forehead exactly the way he always had. He apologized for another busy week, mentioned a client presentation, asked whether I'd be home for dinner. His voice never trembled. His eyes never avoided mine. If he was lying, he had practiced. I smiled. "I'll actually be cooking tonight." He seemed pleasantly surprised. "I've missed your lasagna." "So have I." That part wasn't a lie. After he left, I unlocked his phone using the same passcode we'd shared for years. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. The message itself had already become proof enough that something required measuring. I wanted context. The conversation contained almost nothing. Only 3 messages. The one I'd seen. His reply, "Glad you got home safely." And another. No names. Only an unsaved number. Interesting. People who expect secrecy often delete conversations. People who believe they are safe become careless. I copied the number. Nothing else. And then I locked the phone exactly where I'd found it. By noon, I had a name. Emily Carter, 34 years old. Marketing consultant. Recently hired by one of Daniel's largest clients. Public social media. Professional awards. Volunteer work. Photographs from charity events. A life that looked perfectly respectable. At 1:30 in the afternoon, I sent a message. "Hello, Emily. I'm Daniel's wife. We are hosting a small dinner tomorrow evening with a few people connected to the project. Daniel mentioned you've been helpful, and I'd love for you to join us." The wording mattered. No accusation. No emotion. Only hospitality. She replied 7 minutes later. "I'd be honored. Thank you so much." Interesting. Very interesting. Either she had no idea I existed, or she believed I knew nothing. Both possibilities were useful. That afternoon, I called Margaret. "I need copies of every licensing agreement we discussed last year." She didn't ask questions. "I'll have them delivered before 10 tomorrow morning." Then I called our accountant. I requested financial summaries covering the previous 24 months. Again, no explanations. Professionals understand timing. Finally, I called one more person. My grandfather's oldest friend, Walter Hayes. He had retired after serving as a judge for nearly 20 years. He attended almost every important event in my life, not because he offered legal advice, because he understood silence. When I invited him to dinner, He paused. What kind of evening should I expect? The kind where nobody should interrupt until the foundation finishes settling. He chuckled softly. I'll wear my gray suit. That evening, Daniel came home carrying flowers. White lilies. My favorites. He apologized again for working too much. He even suggested we take a weekend trip after his next project ended. I thanked him, placed the flowers in water, watched him describe meetings that may or may not have happened. He spoke for 23 uninterrupted minutes. I counted, not because the number mattered, because counting kept emotion from replacing observation. That night, while Daniel slept peacefully beside me, I stood alone in my office. The safe opened with 3 familiar turns. Inside rested a single blue folder. I lifted it carefully, ran my fingers across the tab. Tomorrow evening, everyone would believe they were attending an ordinary dinner. Only one person besides me knew it wasn't. And by the time dessert reached the table, every hidden measurement would finally have a number. The following morning began like dozens of others. Coffee at exactly 7. Daniel reading headlines he barely remembered 5 minutes later. His phone face down beside his plate. He complimented the flowers he had brought home the night before, completely unaware that the blue folder sitting inside my office safe carried more weight than every expensive gift he had ever given me. Before leaving, he kissed my forehead. I should be home around 6. I'll have dinner ready. I appreciate you. I know. Those were the last ordinary words we exchanged. At 9:12 a.m., a courier delivered the documents Margaret had promised. 7 contracts. 3 licensing agreements. 1 operating agreement dated March 14th, 6 years earlier. Every page confirmed the same fact. The company's most valuable intellectual property belonged to me personally, and had only been licensed to the business under terms that could be terminated if ownership obligations were violated. Daniel had signed every page. He simply had never paid attention to what he was signing. People often mistake confidence for understanding. The two are rarely the same. At noon, I received the financial reports. They were even more interesting. Over the previous 18 months, Daniel had approved consulting expenses that seemed ordinary until they were arranged in chronological order. Hotel reimbursements, private dinners, conference travel, marketing consultations. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. But together they formed a map. Maps tell stories that individual roads never do. By 4 o'clock, dinner was almost ready. The dining table held 8 plates. Crystal glasses, white candles, my grandmother's silverware. Everything looked peaceful. A strong building often appears perfectly calm moments before inspectors begin examining its foundation. Walter arrived first. He smiled, placed a small wooden box in my hands, and whispered, "Whatever happens, remember who taught you to measure." Inside the box rested my grandfather's old folding ruler. The edges were worn smooth after decades of use. I slipped it into my pocket. Margaret arrived next. She greeted Daniel politely when he walked through the front door. He looked surprised. I didn't realize tonight was such a formal gathering. I thought it would be nice, I said. Then the doorbell rang again. Emily stood on the porch wearing a navy blue dress and holding a bottle of wine. She smiled warmly. "You must be Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me." "My pleasure." Daniel froze for only a fraction of a second. Most people would never have noticed. I did. His right hand tightened around the back of a chair. His breathing changed. Only once. Then he smiled. "Emily, I didn't know you were coming." She looked confused. "I thought you mentioned the team might get together sometime." I must have forgotten. People rarely realize how much truth hides inside the words I forgot. Dinner began quietly. The conversation drifted from business to travel, then to books. Walter asked thoughtful questions. Margaret mostly listened. Daniel laughed a little too loudly. Emily seemed increasingly uncomfortable. I counted how many times Daniel said her name. 8. I counted how many times he avoided looking directly at me. 17. Numbers reduce confusion. Halfway through dinner, Walter complimented the meal. Emily thanked me for the invitation again. Daniel reached for his water. That was when I stood. No dramatic music. No shouting. Just the quiet sound of a chair sliding backward. I wanted everyone here because misunderstandings grow larger when they remain private. Silence settled over the room. I placed Daniel's phone on the table. I saw a message 2 nights ago. Nobody moved. I continued calmly. It said, "Last night meant everything to me. Thank you." Emily's face lost its color. Daniel immediately leaned forward. "Sarah, let me explain." I gently raised one hand. "You'll have your turn." He stopped speaking. Not because he wanted to, because my voice carried something he had not heard from me before. Complete certainty. I turned toward Emily. "When I invited you, I didn't know whether you knew Daniel was married." Her eyes filled with confusion. I didn't know." She looked toward Daniel. "But he told me you had been separated for almost a year." The room became perfectly still. I looked at Daniel. He looked back at me. Neither of us blinked. "I never said that," he answered. Emily frowned. "You absolutely did." She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, opened a conversation. She turned the screen toward everyone. One message read, "Things have been over between us for months. We are only finishing paperwork." Daniel closed his eyes. Just once. The structure had begun collapsing under its own weight. "I made mistakes," he finally admitted. "It wasn't serious." Emily stared at him. "You told me you loved me." He said nothing. She whispered, almost to herself, "So I wasn't the only person being lied to." "No," I answered softly. "You weren't." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel stood. His voice became louder. "This doesn't belong in front of everyone. It belongs exactly here," I replied. He changed tactics. "This is humiliation." "No, it's documentation." He pointed toward the folder. "What's that supposed to be?" "The part you never read." I opened the blue folder, removed the licensing agreement, placed it in front of him. "You remember signing these?" He glanced at the first page. "I signed hundreds of documents. My point is that 6 years ago, every piece of proprietary software, every client framework, and every operating system this company depends on remained licensed through intellectual property registered solely in my name." Margaret quietly nodded. "That is correct." Daniel looked confused. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Margaret answered calmly, "that if the licensing agreement is terminated under Section 12 because of a breach of fiduciary obligations within the company, the corporation immediately loses the legal right to use those assets." His face turned pale. He looked back at me. "You'd never do that." "I already have." He stared. I slid one final document across the table. The termination notice was filed this morning at 10:18. Walter folded his hands. Nobody interrupted. Daniel looked from one face to another. "This is because of one message?" "No. This is because you spent years assuming I wasn't paying attention." He tried something different. His shoulders lowered. His voice softened. "I was confused. I never meant to hurt you. I believe that. I still love you. I believe you love the version of me that never questioned you." Tears appeared. Real ones. Or convincing ones. Either way, they changed nothing. He reached across the table. "We can fix this." "We could have." "When?" "Before you chose dishonesty over conversation." Emily quietly stood. "I'm leaving." I walked her to the front door. Before stepping outside, she turned toward me. "I'm sorry." "I know. I truly didn't know." "I believe you." She nodded once and left. Back inside, Daniel remained seated. The room felt strangely peaceful, not because the pain had disappeared, because uncertainty had. Walter finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of many decades. When a bridge collapses, he said, people blame the final truck that crossed it. He looked directly at Daniel. But engineers know the failure began long before the collapse became visible. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue. Over the next 45 days, attorneys completed the legal work. The business continued under a new name. Daniel sold his remaining ownership interest through a negotiated settlement. After taxes and restructuring, I paid him $1.4 million for his shares. Contracts should be honored. Marriage should have been too. Emily sent one handwritten letter 2 weeks later. Only 4 sentences. She apologized again. She wrote that deception had stolen years from both of us. I placed her letter inside a drawer, not because I wanted to remember the betrayal, because I wanted to remember that honesty sometimes arrives from unexpected people. 6 months later, I rebuilt my grandfather's old workshop behind my house. Walter helped me install the shelves. Everything returned to its proper place, square, and my grandfather's folding ruler. It rests on the workbench today. Sometimes visitors ask why I keep such an old tool when newer ones are more accurate. I simply smile, because accuracy was never the lesson. Patience was. People reveal themselves eventually. You don't force the measurement. You simply wait until the lines become impossible to ignore. The house is quieter now. The mornings are different. The blue ceramic bowl still sits beside the front door. Only one set of keys rests inside it. For a long time I considered throwing it away. Instead, I kept it, not as a reminder of loss, as proof that empty spaces are sometimes evidence of healthier foundations. Every now and then I open my grandfather's ruler. I hear the familiar clicking sound as each section unfolds. It reminds me that every structure, whether a home, a business, or a marriage, depends on what cannot always be seen. Cracks begin small. So does wisdom. People often ask whether I regret inviting Emily into my home. I don't, because that dinner wasn't about exposing someone else. It was about refusing to deceive myself any longer. This is not revenge. This is arithmetic. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.